Hello, welcome to part 5 and the final part of The Woman on the Ledge. Hope you enjoy. Chapter 52. The Golden Hour. That's what they call it. I saw it on one of those police shows on TV and it immediately got my attention. It's not really an hour. It's the critical period straight after the crime is committed. The quicker the police can preserve the evidence, the greater the chance of catching the predator. But an hour was just about all we needed. Whilst I did my thing outside, pushing my way through the small crowd, forcing Kevin the security guard to grab hold of me and hang on to me as I implicated myself in the death of my woman on the pavement, there would be plenty of time for Haley to destroy the CCTV evidence and turn off the ground floor cameras. There would be more than enough time for Jerry and Haley and, of course, Emily's phones to disappear. I turned to Sarah, who was listening intently, her head tilted to one side. Do you remember how you told me that I changed the way police dealt with investigations? I asked her. How they would treat it as suicide based on what I told them. She nods. With a suicide, all the police have to do is produce a couple of statements from the courier. It would be a different investigation entirely. They'd delay sealing off the building and making it a crime scene. They'd fail to look for suspects or to prevent them from leaving the scene. Of course, it wouldn't be long before they found Dan's security pass in Maddie's pocket and her handbag hanging on the nearby railing with her purse and bank cards inside. These would give them a lead as to her true identity, which, of course, needed to happen. But for a few hours yet, they still couldn't be certain who handbag belonged to or how the security pass had ended up in the victim's pocket. Only when Dan identified the body later that evening would they know for sure that the victim was Maddie, and by then I would be the prime suspect. Haley would be about to become a key witness against me, and Jerry wouldn't even be on their radar. Why would he be, when they had me? Not that they had enough to arrest me, not yet, not that night. But I knew that the moment DC Gallagher entered the room with her notebook and pen, pulled out a chair and sat down in front of me, that she suspected me. From this point on, it was all down to me. This was a huge responsibility, of course, and scary. Acting innocent whilst trying to appear guilty is not as straightforward as it seems. Maddie, bewildered look. It was Maddie who fell from the roof. The girls had made me go over the scene a lot of times during rehearsals. It's like acting drunk. The trick is not to try and look drunk. Instead, you have to try extremely hard, too hard to look sober. And it's the same with acting guilty. You have to try to appear innocent and let what you say and do fulfill the tasks of arousing suspicion. For instance, give conflicting accounts to witness. I was there inside the building with her. I didn't know she was inside the building. Struggle with the security guard. Try to leave the scene of the crime. Kevin was telling the truth. I did struggle. I did try to leave. Lie to the police. Make it a credible lie, and one you'll get caught on. I swiped someone else into the building. Give them the name of the alternative suspect they'd find no trace of. Helen Jones. A fake name, if ever there was one. And then, of course, I needed both opportunity and motive, and I had the perfect motive. Love. That one was an inspiration, all Haley's idea, of course, based on the genuine suspicion she'd initially had about me. We knew it wouldn't take the police long to speak to her, and once they did, my motive for killing Maddie would become crystal clear. All those times I'd lurked outside Dan's office, inside Dan's office, outside his home, and according to Haley, outside the restaurant before he left the airport. With the benefit of hindsight, it would make perfect sense to her that I had an unrequired obsession with her boss, and she was right. We could use this to our advantage. It would be a full-blown affair, not an unrequited obsession, if you believe my account, but, again, I had to make sure no one did. As for Jerry, As soon as the word reached him, as soon as he realised that I had been there that night, that I had the hots for Dan, but not for him, always a problem for someone with a big ego, that I was the police #1 suspect, well, he'd delight he'd delight he'd delight in implicating me. Why wouldn't he? Admittedly, humiliating me on the lower roof terrace on the evening of the office party wasn't part of the script. I went out on a limb there. My bad, I know. But even without that, he'd need to account for his security pass being inside the building, and this would be a golden opportunity to pin it on him. So, what if it was a lie that it had been stolen? He didn't kill Maddie, did he? He might have had an argument with her, but she was alive when he left the roof terrace. And what was the office temp doing in the building on the Saturday evening anyway? She must have done it. Besides which, after my antics on the smoking terrace, I was obviously a complete bitch. In his mind, the end would justify the means. Both the end and the means would be his undoing, of course. Helen has researched it. Even if you didn't get him for Maddie's murder, he'd have committed the whole string of other offences. I looked at Sarah. Preventing the course of justice, she agrees, with aggravating features. Leaving the scene of a crime. Misdirecting the investigation. Pressure his wife to give him an alibi, I say, although she may not have needed much persuading. They've already got the person who did it, darling. But for God's sake, but for the sake of the bank, the shareholders, you know, it's better that I don't get caught up in any of this. Better to say that I was at home. He'd be looking at 7 years for that alone, Sarah says. And then there would be the messages, which would prove that he'd been attempted to have sex with the 14-year-old. He could serve 10 years in prison. I consider this, biting my lip. We wanted him for murder. He'd get more for murder. A minimum term of 15, probably more like 20. Helen had told us after she'd researched it fully, and he'd have to serve all 20 in prison. But failing that, 10 would do. Sarah hesitates. But we've also prevented the course of justice, she reminds me, and conspired to do so. You know that, right? You could also get a long stretch in prison. All of you. But only if we get caught. I heard her carefully. I want to know what we have forgotten, what we have missed. You've taken a huge risk, Kate, she continues. I'm sure you don't need me to tell you that, framing yourself for Maddie's murder. I never set foot inside the building, I reminded her. They'd never be able to prove I was on the roof that night. You told them you were there, she points out. Maybe I was confused. Maybe I'm one of those people who blames themselves, confesses to things they haven't done. She looks at me for a long moment, then nods. So, she says, that's why you put yourself in the building, to account for the Temp 1 security pass. Someone had to be there with Maddie at the end, I say. Like you said, hitting yourself with a broken bottle would be a tough thing to do. She could have passed out on the roof. We needed someone to help her. We also needed Hayley to reset the CCTV and turn off the cameras. We had to get her in and out the building without anyone knowing she was there. Putting me inside the building with Temp 1 would solve that problem. And it would also make me the prime suspect, with which we needed in order to divert any attention away from Jerry. After all, his pass was used too. And you expected him to say you'd stolen it? We expected him to say he'd lost it. And then I would say that Helen had the opportunity to steal it and needed a pass to get in. So that was Helen's purse, to account for Jerry's pass. Yes, and to build me a defence, we needed the focus of the investigation to stay firmly on me, so we made sure the police wouldn't believe me about Helen's existence. But, at the same time, there was a third pass used inside the building, so it would confuse things as to who was using which pass until we were ready for Jerry to come under suspicion. And if anything went wrong or things went out too far, Sarah guesses, Helen could come forward, corroborating your account that you went there with her to look for the earring. If I needed her to, yes. I agree. Of course the police would never find her if we didn't want them to. There was no Helen Jones. She didn't exist. And did she go to the party at St. Catherine's Dock? No. It was enough that there was a party there that night she intended to go to. We didn't need to prove she went. She met Haley 2 streets away at the place where Haley and Maddie had parked my car. I thought your car was in Kendrick Place. It was. That's where Helen met Haley and Maddie earlier in the evening and handed them the keys. They drove my car to the city and parked it nearby. After she left Eastcheap, Helen went back to the car and waited there for Haley, ready to drive her straight home. Haley was unlikely to need an alibi because her own security pass was never used inside the building, but she needed to get back to home quickly just in case. The minute she got home, she used her phone to make a call so that it would cell site to her home address. She'd left her own phone at home, of course. And then her next job was to get rid of her clothes and dispose of all the Nokias. She had Helen drop them in the Regent's Canal on her way home. She'd already wiped all the laptops. Then it was just a case of waiting for the police to call Dan. And we all knew it wouldn't be long before Jerry found out that the security guard had messed up and overwritten the CCTV, which would let Jerry know he was in the clear. Exactly. That would be his cue to breathe a big sigh of relief and start working on his alibi. And all that was left after that was to find a good hiding place for Emily's phone. Chapter 53. They discovered the phone at 10 o'clock on the Sunday evening in mid-February, when Kevin from security was doing his rounds. Out of the blue, it started ringing from inside Jerry's office. Kevin glanced through the glass, but couldn't see a phone on the desk. He found this suspicious. Why would you leave your phone in the office all weekend without coming back for it? He also knew that Dan's wife had been using a phone that night she died that had never been found. Dan had asked Kevin to keep his eyes and ears open for it as he did his tours around the building. So when Kevin called Dan immediately said he would call the phone himself. Dan did so. Kevin confirmed that it was ringing. Dan called it a second time, then the third. Each time, it rang again. The police were called and Jerry's office was opened up and his sofa turned on to its side and examined. Emily's missing phone was inside, tucked through the phone-sized rip in the fabric and hidden inside the frame. The police carried out an overnight forensic download and found the messages, 653 in total. Kevin was now a hero. We chose this for him, to make up for what we did to him over the CCTV. We felt bad about that, but we knew Kevin would now be supercharged and keen to help the investigation in any way he could. By the time Jerry arrived at work the following morning, Gallagher and Heaton and 3 uniformed officers were there waiting. He got out of the lift and walked through the glass doors as if it was a normal Monday morning, only to have a police officer step out of his office and greet him and read him his rights. I listened, smiling insanely, as Helen phoned to tell me this. Later, when it was safe for me to speak to Haley, I insisted that she tell me all over again. I wanted to hear every little detail firsthand, and she told me how Jerry had frozen in the doorway to the office, how his face had fallen, how his eyes had moved quickly past the police office towards his room, to the upturned sofa and the messy search that was still going on. He tried to get past the police into his room, and then the 2 uniformed had moved to block him, had taken hold of his arms. "Get the fuck off me," he roared, lashing out at the one with the handcuffs. Gallagher and Heaton stepped forward. "You're under arrest, Mr. Seeger," Gallagher told him, "for the murder of Madeleine Blakely. You need to come." "You stupid fucking bitch," Jerry had cut in, sneering. You're going to regret this. You've made the biggest mistake of your career." He struggled hard, trying to stop the handcuffs from going on, and had to be taken to the ground in front of the interns, in front of the associates, in front of Haley and Maria, his secretaries of 25 years. I could picture his expression as he was dragged to his feet and escorted out the building. I could imagine his terror, his humiliation, as he was taken down the lift to the foyer and out through the revolving door. He'd have spent the past 2 months in some kind of purgatory, no doubt, hearing about my arrest and bail status from Dan and paying a keen interest in, initially wondering if his life was about to unravel. But as the weeks went by, growing steadily more secure, more confident, more hopeful that his secrets would remain safe. And now, here it was, the reversal of fortune that would turn his life upside down. Chapter 54. We'd waited for 2 reasons. Firstly, I needed to have been on bail long enough for a court to recognise the true impact on me on Jerry's lies. The time I'd spent on bail, the restriction on my freedom, the fear of being arrested again at any moment, being sent to prison. I'd kept a diary during the time detailing my ordeal, which would later become a victim impact statement. We needed it to be crystal clear that I'd been the victim of Jerry's lies. Never could it cross anyone's mind that it might be on the other way round. Secondly, we needed Maddie released by the courier. That was our cue. As soon as she was safely in the ground, and it was too late for Jerry's defence team to ask for her to be cut open again, Haley would take Emily's phone out of the former hidden place, charge it up, and slip it down back into Jerry's sofa. Through the holes she'd made it fabric, something she could quite easily do when she was alone in the office after hours. She would call the phone at an opportune moment when she knew Kevin was doing his rounds. Not that Jerry's defence team would find anything helpful that the original post-mortem hadn't uncovered, but we didn't want Maddie cut open a second time, and we especially didn't want Jerry to have any say in that being allowed to happen. The first post-mortem won't conclude that she'd been violently attacked with a wine bottle. Now the wine bottle would prove to have Jerry's DNA all over it. Soon they'd find Jerry's fibres on her clothing and his DNA on the scrapings taken from underneath her fingernails. Her defence wounds and bruises would complete the picture, but death was suspicious. There was no way a second post-mortem could conclude differently. So we agreed that until Maddie was buried, I'd remain a suspect. The fear I felt during the time was real, and the impact huge. Helen had come down the evening before my arrest to comfort me. She brought us a Chinese takeaway. We'd had a wine, and I tried to eat, but the whole time I was wondering if they would knock on the door. What if the police come for me this evening? They can't find you here, I told her. By then, Helen was the calmer of the 2 of us. Stop worrying, she said. We'll see them out the window. I could be out the door and up the stairs before they get to the communal entrance. But in the end, I'd been too nervous to eat, and Helen had gone back home. I was frightened, but glad when the police knocked on my door the following morning. The wait was finally over. The biggest acting job of my career had begun. Later, released on bail, awaiting the results of the forensics, I knew I was lucky to be able to spend Christmas with my family, but deep inside, I felt cut off from the world around me. I was living in limbo. I couldn't see or talk to Haley. I had Helen to confide in, but we had to be careful in case the police came back, or in any case anyone saw us together. We were restricted talking on the phone. I couldn't tell Fern or anyone else the truth. I'd done this for Maddie, for Emily, for Haley, for Helen, and for myself too, and I didn't regret it for one moment, but I hadn't anticipated the paranoia and the isolation I'd feel. The weeks went by, and on the day of the funeral, as we imagined the flowers, the coffee and the hymns inside the church, the procession to the graveyard, Helen had reassured me that my ordeal was drawing to an end. But it wasn't until I got to the phone call with Helen 3 days later to say the phone had been found and Jerry had been arrested that I began to breathe again. Haley had come through for me, for all of us. Chapter 55. So that's it, I say. The whole truth. I've told you everything. Sarah doesn't speak for a moment. So I add softly, "Do you hate me?" Sarah's eyes meet mine, and it's then I realise she's not angry. She's not pissed off with me. I've known at the police station that wasn't stupid, far from it. And I'd known when Fern offered to keep working for me that there was a risk she might figure a few things out. But I expected her to be angry. I expected her to resent the hell out of me for all the lies I told her. And yet, the expression on her face says otherwise. Her expression one is empathy. It's certainly not one of judgment or blame. "I don't blame you," she says after a beat. I understand your reasons." "And if he goes down for it?" I ask uncertainly. "For murder?" There was a pause. She moistened her lips. Then he'll be an old man when he comes out." Our eyes met. "How long?" My voice sounds thick and strange. She picks up her phone from where she was sitting on the table in front of her. She taps and scrolls. I wait. Eventually, stops scrolling and reads for a moment. Much will depend on how the prosecution presents the case. But if a jury is persuaded that Maddie confronted Jerry with what she knew about her daughter and that he killed her to shut her up and hid the evidence, I caught my breath. This is what we'd be banking on. Then that would fall under Schedule 21, paragraphs 3 and 2D of the 2020 Sentencing Act, which says, I ask, feeling myself start to shake. She lifted her eyes from her phone. That he'd get 30 years in prison. 30 years? I gasped. Are you serious? Sarah nods. If it was apparent and provable that the murder was committed to obstruct the course of justice, then, yes, he would be in a category of 30 years tariff. We looked at each other silently across the table, and I can't help but notice the glimmer in our eyes. I feel rooted in the present moment. It's as though I'm in a vivid dream. I'm suddenly aware of the low hum of voices in the room with us, as if it had been, as if it had all been muted, and now the sounds had been turned back on. I look towards the bar, where a small crowd is gathering. The room is filling up. Guests are arriving for dinner. Two white-haired women in expensive coats with expensive shopping bags are being shown to a table not too far from ours. "Are you still my lawyer?" I ask. Am I still going to need one? She inclines her head. "Honestly, Tate, I don't know." "You found out that Helen was living in Claire Henry's flat," I say, leaning forward. "So the police could too. Is that what you're thinking?" She looks dismissive. "I was trying to find Helen," she says. "They'd have to be looking for her to make that connection. They don't seem to be doing that." "Claire's back next week," I inform her. "Helen's moving out. She's found a flat in Hungary, not far from where Dan lives." Sarah thinks about this. "Well, I can't see why the police would start looking for her now. And once she's moved, how they'd find her. They'd be looking for Helen Jones, not Helen Miloweski." I said. "So?" I asked tentatively. What have we missed?" Sarah thinks for a moment, then says, "I'm afraid I can't answer that. I'd be crossing a line." I nodded. "I understand. So what happens now?" "The police will contact you to sign the bail forms, and that's just a formality. You're already free to go on with your life." "And can I call you?" I ask, "if anything happens, if I still need a lawyer?" She nods. "Yes, you can call me if you need me." She pauses, then looks me in the eye. "I hope you don't, though. I think you've been through enough." We leave it there. I don't need to tell her how it feels to know what happened to Emily, to Helen, to me, and to Haley was important enough for her to listen and to care and understand. She stands, pulls her handbag over her shoulder, picks up a laptop bag, and we walk towards the door. Out in the lobby, Fern is walking from the lift. She notices us standing in the doorway and looks surprised. "You still here?" she asks. "I thought you left ages ago." I don't know what. Sarah lets me answer. Fern waits, smiling, her eyes moving back and forth. "We were waiting for you," I say quickly. "Really?" Fern says. "All this time?" "We wanted to say thank you." Fern scoffs, waving her hand about me. So, what else have you been talking about? I glance at Sarah. Beyond her, through the glass door that borders the street outside, there are flecks of white sleet floating gently down to the ground. It's snowing, I say as a diversion. Tate! Fern presses me. What's going on? Sarah and Fern both gape at me. I wonder what my sister would say if she knew the truth. Would she understand? After we left, I got a call from Dan, I say at last. I sense Sarah stiffening beside me, her face is expressionless, but she must be thinking how easily the lies trip off my tongue. Fern doesn't notice any of this, but her face clouds over the thought of me talking to Dan. She still thinks we were having an affair, and she doesn't approve of this connection between us, which would, indeed, be distasteful in all circumstances if it were true. I don't have to have my sister think badly of me, of course, but my supposed affair with Dan had been integral to how things played out, and in a funny kind of way, even though our relationship was an illusion, I have felt very close to Dan, and it feels natural that he would be the one to bring me the news that we've all been waiting for so long to hear. What do you want? Fern asks, frowning. He wanted to tell me that they've got the person who killed Maddie. You're kidding! Oh, who is it? I tell her that it's Jerry, and she smiles and smiles. Chapter 56. Sharon Seeger has withdrawn her alibi. I know this because Dan called to them. Really. Everyone at the office now believes that I was set up by Jerry, and Haley has gently and carefully encouraged this. She had a whip round, and they brought me a present, a very beautiful, very expensive blue glass dish with stained glass daisies, which now sits on my table in my living room. Haley insisted that she be the one to bring the gift round to me in person. She wanted to apologise, she said. Haley, please, I told her, showing her into my hallway, keeping up the presence until the door had fully closed for her. I understand how it looks, honestly. He fooled you. He fooled all of us. I don't hold it against you. Well, that's very kind, Tate, she said as the door slammed shut, and very magnanimous. She stumbled over the word, and we both laughed out loud, and then started crying. And then we threw our arms around each other and held one another tight. We stood like that, clinging to each other for what we felt like a long time, and we finally broke apart and walked into the living room and sat down. Was it awful? I asked her, wanted to know, but not wanting to know. It was quick, Tate, she said, sparing me, and she was barely conscious. I think she would have felt too much, you know. I know. I nodded, my throat tightening. I don't know how you did it, I told her. I don't think I could have been that brave. Tate, she protested, her voice hoarse from crying. What you've done, I couldn't have done that. You've been amazing. We've all done our bit, I said. Helen too. But what you did was truly courageous. Haley looked pleased and said that she wanted to do it. Not just for Maddie and for Emily, but also for Helen and me. When I told her that Jerry had done this to us when we were 14, it had triggered her own guilt about the things that had happened at school when she was a teenager. A girl in her class had got pregnant, and all the other girls at school had been filed to her. Haley had felt bad for the girl and wanted to be supportive, but she hadn't stuck up for her because she'd been too afraid. In a way, she said, this felt as if she'd been able to do she'd been able to right that wrong. And I said that it's strange how things sometimes went full circle, because at school, as word got around about Helen and me, we were also bullied by all the girls. Having Haley tell us this, it felt as though a chapter in our life had been closed. When I later told Helen, she agreed. Now Haley said it was time for her to move on. It was hard for her to get back to the office every day. and I couldn't understand that. I could understand that. She found a job working in the IT department at the Handelsbanken Bank, based in the headquarters of Stockholm, and she was looking forward to making a fresh new start. She'd always wanted to learn a neurotic language, she said, and it would be an excellent career move for her. But she, but she was due to start in 2 weeks' time, and was ready to leave, but returned for the trial. We agreed to stay in touch, and I showed her out an hour later, each of us parting, I imagine, when the same strength of feeling that arises from having connected deeply with another human from a place of extreme vulnerability. I knew that no matter where she went and how infrequently we met up again, we would have a lifelong connection. She, Helen, and I now shared a secret that was written in Maddie's blood, and which would go with us to our graves. Dan offered my job back, so that this was on record, but knew I'd refuse. I didn't want to return to the office either, not even to say goodbye. It would have been too upsetting for me, and I want to put it behind me. Besides, I'm working for Fern now as her assistant manager. I'm really enjoying helping her run the hotel, and I'm really good at it. She allows me time off whenever I need for auditions, and if I get an acting job, that's fine too. This arrangement works perfectly for me, and Fern is also happy with it. She'll often email me contacts to look over or invoices to pay, and trusts me to prioritise my workload and fit it in around my acting week. I feel as though my life has balanced at last, and that I'm getting to earn decent money and doing something that makes me feel valued, whilst at the same time I'm able to follow my creative dreams and just see what happens, without pinning my hopes and whether I'll make it as an actress, without being attached to the outcome. I think that expression is. Besides, I'm still waiting for the outcome of my most recent performance, which is the only one that matters to me now. Dan gets regular updates from the police liaison officer, who's still a frequent visitor at the house and will be until the trial begins in June. Jerry has been remained in custody, so the trial has to happen quickly. When Dan tells me this, my heart skips a beat. The police can't tell Dan everything, of course. We have to wait for the trial to know exactly how Jerry's going to try and wiggle out of it all. But Dan's been told that he protested his innocence at the police station and that he pleaded not guilty at the first court hearing, as we expected, so we will have to wait a little longer. But there is satisfaction in knowing that he's suffered and wondering who's done this to him, as he sits in his cell and paces up and down in the prison yard. He'll suspect me, I think. Maybe he'll suspect Maddie. Maybe he'll even suspect Haley. But he'll never suspect all three of us. And unless he remembers me, he won't even think about Helen. And even if he does, even if he wakes up one day and works out exactly why this had happened to him, he'll never be able to prove it. And as I said to Helen, if he thinks about it hard enough to remember me as a 14-year-old girl called T, who had sex with in the back of a van all those years ago, he'll never want to tell a jury about that. And besides, his DNA is all over Maddie's body. He was there. He left the crime scene and lied about it. An innocent person doesn't flee a crime scene. Who will believe him now? Chapter 57. I've had a visit from Gallagher and the superintendent called Gail Armitage, who is Gallagher's superior. I was doing the washing up when they arrived, and I saw them out of the kitchen window. I let the plate I was holding on slip down into the bowl of water and took off my rubber gloves, watching them as they slammed the car doors shut, crossed the street, and walked down the steps. When they buzzed on the intercom, it floored me for a moment, transporting me back into the time the day I was arrested. I froze, then picked up George and hugged her to me, trembling as I picked up the receiver, fumbling and dropping it and having to retrieve it again. "Can we come in, Tate?" a strange female voice said. I buzzed them in, walked into the hallway and slid back the catch. I don't know what I was expecting as I opened the door, but I could see immediately that they looked sorry. Armitage was smiling somewhat weakly, and Gallagher looked generally resourceful. She was holding a large sack which she handed to me. I could see my coat and my favourite blue jumper through the clear plastic. I shook as I stood in the doorway, put George down, and took the sack from Gallagher, dragging it inside. I waved them into the front room. They each took a seat, Armitage on the sofa and Gallagher in the chair. I sat on the puff near the window while they told me that Jerry Seeger had told me that while they told me that Jerry Seeger had been indecent for on 5 counts, which they said meant that he'd appeared on the dock at the Old Bailey and the charges had been read out. I raised my eyebrows. 5 counts. Murder, of course, said Armitage. Preventing the cause of justice, assaulting a police officer with intent to resist arrest, meeting a child after sexual grooming, and sexual activity with a child. Sexual activity. Tears sprang to me. You mean he managed to... One of the texts suggests that he had been kissing, she said. Dan's daughter doesn't want to make a statement, so we only have the phone messages. But in the context of everything, it's very serious. We're confident that he took Maddie Blakely's life in order to silence her, and making a statement which caused us to believe you are responsible is also very serious. I want to apologise that we got it so wrong. It's okay, I murmured, because of course it was. Chapter 58. The trial begins in Court 5 on the Old Bailey on a hot June morning. The sky outside is cloudless, the courtroom airless and warm. I sit in the public gallery with Haley, Dan, and Emily, and a number of others from the bank, all of us providing a little bubble of solidity around Dan and Emily, but around me too, the wrongly accused. It's too risky for Helen to come, but it's natural that Haley would fly back from Stockholm to support her former boss and his daughter, and her presence ensures that I am made to feel welcome by my associates and secretaries. Every time someone gets up to let me by, I'm given a pat on the back or a smile. I've gone from being a nobody to a celebrity, and I must admit, it feels good to be one of the crowd. The prosecution opening is like being told a story, and it's pretty much the story we wrote, in fact. But it sounds so much better delivered by a bespectacled barrister dressed in a wig and a gown. Maddie confronted Jerry with the messages to her daughter, we are told. Jerry tried to snatch the phone from her. Maddie fought back. Jerry hit her with the wine bottle. Maddie fell to the ground and didn't get up. Jerry panicked. Knowing there was no cameras on the roof, he picked her up and then pushed her unconscious body over the edge of the building, thinking the gnash on her head could be explained by a way of her fall, and intending to make it look like a suicide. As I listen, I can't help but imagine what Helen and I would have thought had we known as schoolgirls that one of our creative works would end up being dramatised in Court 5 of Old Bailey. It feels very grand. Not that I'm proud of what we've done. Far from it. Emily's bowed head and swollen eyes kept me grounded. We have taken a huge risk. I will never be complacent. And when Haley and I met outside the courtroom, there were no words between us. There can't be. But I know that she, like me, is quaking inside. The defense case is weak. Jerry is unable to explain the messages, and he attempts to cover his lies with more lies. When the verdict comes in, there is no sign of Jerry, and the courtroom is so quiet that I begin to wonder if something has gone wrong, because it's taken ages for him to be brought up from the cells. For several moments we wait, and I'm filled with trepidation. I'm so nervous that my limbs go numb. But then, there is the sound of the door opening, and the all too familiar jangling of keys, and Jerry, bowed head, appears in the docks. He is convicted on all counts, and he accepts the verdict with the same lack of dignity that he exhibited on his arrest. 3 weeks later, when he was sentenced, he is again led kicking and screaming out of the courtroom and into the cells. I watch his face, his eyes bulging in fear and fury, and my heart sinks. I daren't look directly at Haley, but we're sitting just a few seats away from each other, on both associates, and our eyes flicker to meet each other's for a very brief second before moving away. When it's over, I have hugged Haley and Dan and Emily and the others. I wander down the passage to the square outside to recover an equilibrium, to sit and be calm. I've come to like it here, behind the Old Bailey. I'm smothered by the collisions of arches and slopes, by the serene stillness that surrounds me. But I break the stillness as I put the phone to my ear and tell Helen softly, 33 years. Minimum of 30 to be served before he has any chance of parole. CPS lawyer later tells Dan that Jerry's counsel had advised him that there were no grounds for an appeal. What about Emily? Sarah asks me when we speak again. How will she cope knowing that the man she loved and trusted had gone to prison for killing her mother? I tell her that Emily now hates him, and this time she really won't ever see him again. She has woken from whatever spell she had been under, and is mortified that she could ever be charmed by him. Of course, she is devastated by the loss of her mother, and I feel bad for her about that at times. But as I said to Sarah, it's a better ending, don't you think? She can remember her mother by the way the world remembers Princess Diana, young and beautiful. Far better than watching her throw up, lose her mind, become incontinent, and constantly reel in and out of pain. And far better than having to go to court and see that pig get maybe 5 years at most for stealing away her childhood and self-esteem, and messing up her life the way they messed up Helen's and mine. I've been seeing the counsellor lately. I haven't told her the whole story, of course, but I felt it was time to talk about what Jerry did to me when I was 14. His conviction was closure of a very big kind. But sometimes something needs to be said out loud enough times for it to remain outside of you instead of locked up inside your head. I don't call him by his name for fear that the connection will be made. I just refer to him as he or him. I talk about the intense shame I have lived with all my life, how it repeatedly resurrected, triggering in the present day by everyday events, mistakes, conversations, and encounters. She tells me repeatedly that it wasn't my fault. I know this, of course, but I need to know this. I need my body to know this. Just because I met someone and I'd like to get closer. He's an actor who stayed at Scott Street recently. Our eyes met over the coffee jug at the morning breakfast buffet, and we couldn't stop talking. Anyway, the counselling seems to be working, because we're now on our third date. As for Maddie and my flashbacks, the counsellor tells me to imagine her being lifted away by angels instead of hitting the ground, and I find this had helped. Now, as I close my eyes, I still see her falling, but I find that more I practice, the more able I am to conjure up the angles who carry her up, away into the sky and out through space, and where she is now, and at one with the universe. Dan told me recently that Emily has done well in her GCSE exams in spite of everything, and that she and Rosie have joined a theatre group, which is where they now spend all their time. It's pleased me immensely to hear this, and I'm going along next week to run a workshop. I hear that there's some boy Emily likes there. Dan has met him and finds him entirely suitable. I think he now feels something but relief that she's attracted to someone her own age, and is actively encouraging her to go out. Dan is hope-broken, pale and drawn, but unwavering in his desire to stay strong for his daughter, and although he is now a hard-working single parent, he is generous to me with his time. Since I stepped in to help Maddie conceal her illness that day and subsequently supported her through her treatment, there has been a bond of sorts between us that has been strengthened by my own suffering following the false accusation against me. I get the sense too, in his eyes, we were united as victim of his former boss who abused his trust and mine. So he calls me from time to time, and we meet for a coffee, and on each occasion he seems just a little bit stronger than the last I am, so pleased to see that he is doing okay. So, mostly, and for almost all of us, life goes on. Every now and then, as I walk down the street, I see the police car, and my heart backs into my lungs, and stays there until it's passed. But moments later, the memory of how close I came spending time in prison is no different from any other memory I'd like to forget. I hold myself back into the present and focus on the task in hand. Learning the lines for my next play. The ad I need to place for more kitchen staff at Scott Street. What to wear on my date on Friday. Whether I should cook chicken or fish. I walk with Helen on the heath, and or sit curled up on the sofa, drinking wine with her in her new living room. And I look at her and think about how he tried to divide us, but how fate brought us back together. When I eventually lie next to my new boyfriend, I remember that time I is a great healer, and no matter what I have done, I'll now be much richer for my experiences of how truly lived. When I think of him and what he did, I now replace the memory with a better one. I remember how, at one point, his eyes had wandered away the courtroom from the docks towards us and landed on me, met mine. He looked at me blankly, and I could read nothing there. But I wonder if there's a part of him that recognizes me, is still wondering where he knows me from, who I am. I know where I know we got what we wanted, and this is what really matters, what's happening in here and now. But a part of me still wants to believe that it will hit him at some point, that the day it will come to him like a bolt from the blue as he paces around the prison yard, or the night, or it might wake him suddenly like a small icy hand clutching at his heart in the cold, dark hours of the night. And that is the final page of the book. That is the end. I hope you enjoyed it. I enjoyed it. It was a very good book. But yes, there you go, Mummy and Abba. Hope you enjoy it. Yeah, thank you.